Welcome to InsidePTI, weekly videos designed to get you the trial results you want, agronomy explanations you need, and hopefully some insights that will set you up for success this growing season. Today we're going to talk about nitrogen stabilizers, and this is one of the things that we normally test at the PTI site. With some of the soils we have at the PTI farm, we're naturally wet. We're trying to put more tile in to prevent some of the saturated soils that we've been having. But we've got some really wet soils, and in the event of wet soils, we can have some nitrogen loss. So let's spend a little time and talk about nitrogen loss mechanisms that can happen out in the field. Basically, there's three forms of nitrogen loss that can happen. Number one, there's volatilization, and this is typically where you're putting the nitrogen on top of the soil surface, and this can gas off into an ammonia. So it depends on how you're applying your nitrogen. This typically is going to be with UAN and urea type fertilizers that are not incorporated into the soil, left on top. Leaching is going to be the second form of nitrogen loss. This is where nitrogen can be pushed down deep into our tile lines and then it can disappear. We worry sometimes about nitrogen being pushed down too deep, maybe not so much into the tile sometimes for actual leaching, but sometimes it's just too deep and the roots actually can't get the product. Lastly, denitrification. This is what happens when we have wet soils. We remove the oxygen from the soil and we get denitrification as a result. This is one of the biggest forms of loss we have at PTI because we don't have all the tile we want in yet and we have some saturated soils. And quite honestly, 2019 was a wet year. I think everybody probably had to deal with some wet soils. This is a precipitation map from April and May back in 2019, and it shows a large part of the Midwest. Just tremendous amount of rain, which led to saturated soils. It just seems like every other day it was raining and soils were just saturated. We had water standing, and if we had some nitrogen that was applied and then we had all this rain, we were subject to nitrogen loss. And look at this, we talk about taking the oxygen out of the soil. Here we've got some corn in one of our trials out here where we've got water standing, and this is a real problem. This is where we can actually get that denitrification happening out in the field. So one of the stabilizers we tested this past year in 2019 is a product called Centuro. It's from Koch Agronomic Services. And let's talk a little bit about this stabilizer. So the active ingredient of this is a new product, but it's pronitridine is the new active ingredient in this Centuro nitrogen stabilizer. And again, it is from Koch Agronomic Services. Now, when we go back and look at the three forms of nitrogen loss, Centuro is going to take care of leaching and denitrification. This product will not do anything for volatilization. So we'll talk about this more as we go through, but if you're going to use a nitrogen stabilizer, you need to know what forms of nitrogen loss each of these stabilizer products will control. But again, Centuro, no volatilization control, only leaching and denitrification. So how are we putting on this Centuro as we go to the field to be a nitrogen stabilizer for us? We're applying it on the planter, and we're using our conceal. We're going right through the gauge wheels, and we're putting on a dual band of nitrogen. And with this nitrogen, we actually put the Centuro in. So we've got a tank mix of Centuro with our nitrogen. And again, we've got a dual band application, nitrogen and the stabilizer on both sides of the plant to offer us that protection, leaching, and denitrification. Look at the blue dots. This is where the band of that nitrogen stabilizer is along with the nitrogen, and this is how we're setting it up again at planting time with our conceal planter attachment. So let's talk about some yield results. Did this work? We already talked about that we were super wet. This past spring, did Centuro as a nitrogen stabilizer offer us any protection? Here's some yield data. We were really pleased with the way that Centuro worked out in the field, stabilizing that nitrogen for us, allowing that nitrogen to be used throughout the growing season. And we actually picked up a 16 bushel yield advantage from using this nitrogen stabilizer. You take this 16 bushel advantage times the price of corn less the cost of the nitrogen stabilizer. We actually were looking at return on investments of nearly $50 the acre. Came in at $48.18 an acre. So it's not a big surprise given the year we had with all the wet, saturated soils that a stabilizer would work well for us. But this is the actual data from 2019 showing that when we did offer the protection from a stabilizer, we were seeing some nice return on investments. So today's Inside PTI agronomy tip of the day is nitrogen stabilizers can do a great job protecting against nitrogen loss. Remember the three main nitrogen loss mechanisms: volatilization, denitrification, and leaching. If you're going to use a nitrogen stabilizer, know what form or forms of nitrogen loss the products will protect against. For more information or questions, feel free to reach out to any Precision Planting Premier dealer, or you can email us at InsidePTI@precisionplanting.com. We'll see you on the next episode of Inside PTI. In the meantime, thanks for watching.